Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm your host, Jane Wynette. I'm joined now by Maggie Zayas and Tikiya Young, representing Family Shelter Service. So welcome.
Thank you for having us.
I'm glad to have you here, although we're going to talk about a little bit of a tough topic, and that's the whole issue of teen violence and domestic violence, but how that plays out for young people. So I know, Tikiya, there's kind of this sense of the hidden secret to that. Talk a little bit about it.
Well, much like domestic violence with adults, violence among teens in relationships is something that also is very common. So there's a statistic: 1 in 3 teens will experience an abusive relationship before graduating high school. And as alarming as that statistic is, it is something that is kind of kept very secret because a lot of teens want to feel their independence. They don't want to feel adults judging them or their friends judging them. How their friends feel about them and how adults feel about them is very important to them. So telling another person about abuse that they may be experiencing may not be very comfortable for young people.
I think, I mean, it's hard just thinking about it from an adult perspective. So when you wrap that in with all the teenage angst and that's got to be that much harder. Maggie, you were counseled and educated on prevention, and yet you still were a victim. So can you share with us a little bit about that and some of the challenges and what you've gone through?
Yeah, so in 2011, when I was in college, I was a junior in college, was my first relationship. And luckily, I came from a house with super progressive, super liberal parents who discussed aspects of life and relationships with me that not a lot of other households had. The thing was, you know, their knowledge is limited to their experiences and what they learned. And when they were growing up, coercion wasn't a thing. So my first relationship, I was coerced sexually. And that's how I was assaulted. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't have a definition for it. And, you know, we expect schools to kind of take over where parents, you know, can no longer teach. And when I was growing up in my middle school and my high school, we didn't even talk about healthy relationships, the basics, you know, and I didn't really have any background on it. It wasn't until I was educated and got my certification as a domestic violence sexual assault advocate through a shelter where I actually understood what coercion meant. But by that point, that was 3 years into my relationship, which ended at that point, but I was so conditioned to behave a certain way because of spending 3 years with an abuser. It just snowballed into a second one, which was very physically abusive. And that was, I recognized that much sooner, but I didn't know how to get out. He lived 3 minutes from my parents' house, and I was afraid there'd be some sort of retaliation toward my family. You know, my younger sister lived there, my parents lived there, and I was nervous, I was embarrassed. How could this happen to me again? And it was, you know, like Tikiya said, it's very difficult to talk about these things sometimes. And in terms of healing and going through that and living through that, it can be difficult. There's a lot of after effects of trauma that survivors go through. I have flashbacks, I have triggers, and luckily I have really supportive friends. I have a really supportive family. I have a phenomenal fiance who's very understanding and very supportive of what I need and what I'm going through in my process of healing.
And that's interesting that you talk about it as a process, because I think that's one, Tikiya, you do a lot of prevention education, and as you're doing that prevention education, it's really focused, a lot of it's at the middle school level, which is interesting. I think people would be surprised by that. So talk about why that's such an important time of life to have the conversations.
Well, you know what, we originally started with high school. So we go into the health classes in the high school level and talk to the teens. Usually health is given at the first year or second year. And once we were there, we noticed that it was more like intervention than prevention. So teachers were very welcoming to have us in, but they were like, you know, this is something that many of my students deal with. And so we realized that we needed to see the kids at younger ages when they are beginning to think about dating. Maybe they're not old enough according to their parents' rules or according to what society thinks is okay age to date, but it's something that they're doing among their peers already, and that's a good age to start talking to them.
More formative.
Yes.
More formative, get out ahead of it.
Okay. So getting it the education there for the students before they actually start the unhealthy behaviors. So when we're talking to the middle school students, we're not telling them about 1 in 3 teens experience dating abuse, but we're saying, how do you communicate with a partner? How do you plan and set boundaries for yourself? How do you assertively say no and stand on your word? How do you help a friend if they need help? And where can you find a safe adult?
Well, right there, I think you just gave a mini lesson, which was terrific. And do you find that the community is receptive to that? I mean, what has been the experience as you go in and you have these conversations?
You know what, we have had great growth in our program, and community members are starting to see that this is something that is really, really important for girls as well as boys. And I think a lot of times when people see dating violence or domestic violence, they just think that it's something, you know, wife beater or something girls go through. And what we're teaching our children is everyone needs to learn these behaviors. So at high school, I've had an experience with teen who came to our classes. We were in a school for 3 days, and she recognized that her older sister was in an abusive relationship. So it wasn't her, but she recognized this type of abuse in another person, and she was able to help them and get help with that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, Maggie, how do you see social media, we hear so much about the influence of it. How do you feel it plays out in this arena?
I think there are pros and cons to it, of course. Some pros are, first of all, it's really easy for survivors to get in touch with each other. And I found that as a huge help with my healing process, is that now I have a bunch of friends who had very similar experiences to myself, and we can support each other. We know what we are going through with our after effects that we have to deal with, our trauma. We can find that support because they completely understand. At the same time, you know, there are cons, as with anything. There are some media that normalizes abusive behaviors, as stalking is romantic. It shows that he or she loves you, and that's not okay. Or you hear about kids now, they'll film assaults and post them online, or things like that, which they separate themselves, and it's not acknowledging that this is a problem. They see a like or a retweet or something like that, which can be very negative when trying to find a solution to help people who need it.
Tikiya, what have you found? What struck you the most when you're working with students?
I think I'm struck the most about how young these students are experiencing these behaviors already. So maybe they're not in a formal relationship, but they're in 7th grade having dating experiences with their classmates. One of the other educators told me in the 8th grade class that she was in that one of the students got chased with a knife from a former ex, and this is 8th grade. So I'm always shocked by the amount of things that the students go through, but also how much the adults in their lives may not see it. Okay. And so I think the prevention there is definitely necessary.
Maggie, as we wrap up, one thought if you were to leave the viewers with something on this topic, what would it be?
To always reinforce, if they meet a survivor, and to support them, that it's never the survivor's fault. With each time, my relationship at my home with my parents struggled at these times because I was not acting like myself. And there's a lot of strain in my household. Every single time I came to my parents, they said, it is not your fault. The first 6 times I separated from my first ex, and the second time when I finally left my second ex, my friends stood by me each and every single one of those times. And now, in my process of healing once again, anytime I have a flashback, anytime I have a panic attack, these people are completely by my side as my rocks, as my support system, always letting me know it is not my fault and that they're there for me with whatever help I need.
That's wonderful. I thank you ladies both, for Maggie for sharing your story, and Tikiya for all the good work that you're doing in the schools. It's such an important topic, and it's great to know that while we wish that we're not out there, that there are people like yourselves that are working hard to try to prevent it. So thank you. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having us.
If you would like to find out more about the many ways Family Shelter Service is working to prevent dating violence and sexual assault, please go and visit their website. We're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned. We're coming right back.